The evening shimmered with luxury, the air thick with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of music flowing through the grand estate. Emma moved gracefully through the crowd, the scent of expensive cologne and gourmet cuisine mingling in the air. Her husband, Daniel, stood beside her, engaged in conversation with his colleagues, his admiration for his boss evident in the way he listened attentively. At the centre of it all was Mr. Carter, the man who commanded the room without effort. He was a presence, powerful, confident, and charismatic in a way that made people lean in when he spoke. His wealth was evident not just in the vastness of his home, but in the way he carried himself, as if the world revolved around his decisions. When his gaze landed on Emma, she felt its weight immediately. "You must be Daniel's wife," he said smoothly, extending a hand toward her. "Emma, isn't it? I've heard a lot about you." His deep voice carried an air of interest, and when she placed her hand in his, she felt an unexplainable thrill run up her spine. Emma smiled politely, feeling the intensity of his attention. "All good things, I hope," she responded, glancing at Daniel, who beamed with pride. Mr. Carter chuckled, his eyes lingering on her just a fraction longer than necessary. "Of course," he assured. "Daniel speaks highly of you, smart, creative, and underutilized, I'd say." The comment took her off guard. "Underutilized?" she echoed, tilting her head slightly. "Someone like you shouldn't be sitting at home, waiting for life to happen," he continued. "I have a position opening up, personal assistant. It's not a traditional role. The hours are flexible, the pay is substantial, and you'd be working directly with me on some important matters." Emma's stomach tightened. The offer was unexpected, the implications unclear, yet something about his tone made it feel dangerous. She cast a quick glance at Daniel, but instead of concern, she saw excitement in his eyes. "This could be perfect for you," Daniel interjected eagerly. "You've been talking about finding something new. Working with Mr. Carter would be an incredible opportunity." Emma hesitated, sensing that there was more beneath the surface than just a job offer. Mr. Carter's gaze didn't waver, his confidence in her acceptance unwavering. "Think about it," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with assurance. "I'll have my assistant send over the details tomorrow." As the night wore on, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The opportunity was tempting, a way to regain a sense of purpose, to contribute financially, to be part of something important. But deep inside, something told her that accepting this offer would change everything. Emma stepped into Mr. Carter's home office, impressed by the sleek interior, polished mahogany desk, and towering bookshelves that exuded wealth and power. The walls were adorned with expensive artwork, and the faint scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air. The space felt intimate yet commanding, much like the man himself. Mr. Carter sat behind his desk, a slight smirk playing on his lips as he gestured for her to take a seat. "Welcome aboard, Emma," he said, his voice smooth and deliberate. "I trust you'll find the work here more engaging than you're used to." Emma forced a polite smile, her hands resting on her lap as he slid a folder toward her. The job seemed simple, organizing meetings, handling calls, and managing personal projects. The work wasn't demanding, but his presence made it feel like something else entirely. Over the next few days, Emma adjusted to her new role, but something about the dynamic between them felt charged. Mr. Carter was nothing like Daniel. He was commanding, always in control, and the way he looked at her felt different, intentional, lingering just a second too long. His eyes weren't just observing, they were assessing. At first she brushed it off. He was confident. Powerful men carried themselves like this, she told herself. But as the days passed, she noticed the subtle shifts, the way he leaned in when he spoke to her, his fingertips grazing hers when handing over a document, the compliments that felt more personal than professional. "You have an eye for detail," he remarked one afternoon after she adjusted the lighting for an upcoming video conference. "I like that. Not everyone notices the little things." Emma felt a warmth rise to her cheeks, not from the words themselves, but from the way he said them, his voice dropping just slightly, almost as if it were meant only for her. She knew it was wrong to let the flattery affect her, but compared to the distance that had grown in her marriage, it was difficult to ignore. Daniel had been stressed, distracted, too tired to notice when she put effort into herself, too preoccupied to ask how she was feeling. But Mr. Carter noticed everything. One evening, after an especially long day, Emma gathered her things as Mr. Carter stood by the door waiting to walk her out. The air between them was thick, the silence stretching just enough to be noticeable. As she reached for the doorknob, he stepped closer, his hand brushing against the small of her back. A fleeting touch, light but deliberate. Emma stiffened, her breath catching. It was nothing, yet everything at the same time. "Good night, Emma," he said, his voice low and unreadable. As she walked to her car, her thoughts raced. That touch shouldn't have meant anything. But why did it linger in her mind long after she drove away? The office felt different that evening, quieter, more intimate. The usual buzz of the workday had faded, leaving only the soft hum of the city lights outside and the occasional clink of ice against glass. Mr. Carter poured them both a drink, something smooth and expensive, a gesture that felt more personal than professional. Emma hesitated before accepting the glass, her fingers brushing against his for just a second longer than necessary. The warmth of the whiskey lingered on her tongue, but it was nothing compared to the heat of his gaze. He leaned against his desk, watching her with quiet intensity, his expression unreadable. "You seem distracted lately," he remarked, his voice smooth, deliberate. "Everything all right at home?" Emma let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head as she swirled the liquid in her glass. "Home is fine," she lied, though even she didn't believe it. The truth sat heavy in her chest. Daniel had barely noticed her absence the past few nights. If anything, her late hours had made things easier for him, giving him more time to bury himself in work, in emails, in everything except their marriage. Mr. Carter tilted his head, studying her. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly. "I can see it in your eyes." His words sent a ripple through her, breaking past the walls she had carefully built. For weeks now she had brushed aside her own feelings, convincing herself that everything was fine. But sitting here, under his gaze, she felt something shift. She exhaled, setting down her glass. "It's just," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I feel like I'm fading into the background. Like I'm part of Daniel's life, but not really in it. Does that make sense?" Mr. Carter nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "You deserve more than that," he said simply. "A woman like you shouldn't feel invisible." The way he said it, so certain, so effortless, made her heart beat a little faster. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He had already seen what Daniel hadn't. The loneliness, the quiet ache of being unnoticed. Emma bit her lip, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected. "It's just marriage, I guess," she said, forcing a smile. "You get comfortable, and then one day you wake up and realize you're strangers." Mr. Carter took a slow sip of his drink, considering her words. "Or maybe it's not marriage that changes," he murmured. "Maybe people just stop paying attention." The weight of his words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Emma wasn't sure if he was talking about Daniel or himself, For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with something unspoken, something dangerous. Emma knew she should leave, should put distance between them before this became something she couldn't undo. But she didn't move. And neither did he. The dim light from the desk lamp cast long shadows across the office, highlighting the tension that had been building between them for weeks. The silence was thick, stretching between them like an unspoken truth neither of them wanted to fully acknowledge. Emma stood frozen, her pulse racing, knowing she had let this go too far, but unable to move away. Mr. Carter's gaze was unwavering, his expression unreadable but heavy with intent. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, his presence pulling her in as though gravity itself had shifted. His fingers brushed against her wrist, barely a touch, but enough to make her breath hitch. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured, his voice low, intimate. "I know." Emma swallowed hard, her mind screaming at her to leave, to break the moment before it consumed her. But she didn't, she couldn't, because deep down a part of her had been waiting for this, wanting it, needing to feel something real. Something that made her pulse quicken, that reminded her she was still alive, still capable of desire. His hand lifted slowly, his fingertips grazing her cheek, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It was such a simple gesture, yet it sent a wave of warmth down her spine. She should have stepped back, should have said his name in protest, but instead she leaned into his touch, craving the attention she had been starving for. And then, before she could think, before she could stop herself, his lips were on hers. The kiss was slow, deliberate, as if he was giving her time to pull away. But she didn't. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, gripping onto something she knew she shouldn't have, but it felt too good, too intoxicating to resist. His hand slid around her waist, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss, and, for a brief moment, the rest of the world ceased to exist. Then, reality hit her like a crashing wave. Emma pulled away suddenly, breathless, her heart hammering against her chest. She took a step back, pressing her fingers to her lips, as though trying to erase what had just happened. Guilt hit her instantly, sharp and suffocating. "Mr. Carter, Her voice broke, unsure of what to say, how to justify what had just happened when there was no justification at all. He exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable, though his eyes still held the remnants of what they had just shared. "You don't have to explain," he said calmly. "This doesn't have to mean anything bad." Emma shook her head, panic rising. I can't do this. I'm married." A small smirk tugged at his lips, though his voice remained steady. "I know," he said simply, stepping back, giving her space. "But I also know that you're here. And that kiss? It wasn't just me." She wanted to deny it, wanted to tell him he was wrong, but she couldn't. Because deep down, she knew he was right. The first time it happened, Emma told herself it was a mistake, a fleeting lapse in judgment, an impulsive moment that she would bury, forget, and never allow to happen again. But mistakes don't linger in the air like a secret invitation. Mistakes don't pull you in again and again until you stop resisting. The days that followed the kiss were a blur of confusion, guilt, and a longing she couldn't suppress. She should have walked away. She should have quit, gone back to her life, and pretended none of it had ever happened. But Mr. Carter made it impossible. The way his eyes searched for hers in meetings, the way his fingertips brushed against her arm when he walked past, the way his voice dropped just a little lower when they were alone, it was like he knew exactly how to unravel her. And she let him. Again. And again. The second time there were no words, no hesitations. One late evening, after everyone had left the office, Emma stood in the dim light of his study, knowing exactly what she was about to do. When he pulled her in, his lips hungry, demanding, she didn't resist. When his hands traced the curve of her waist, she let him take her, let herself melt into something she had been starving for. The affair spiraled quickly, faster than she had expected. It was supposed to be just once, then once turned into stolen moments behind closed doors, hushed whispers and text messages she deleted as soon as she read them. Every touch, every look, every secret rendezvous made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. But excitement and guilt do not cancel each other out. They exist together, feeding off one another, twisting inside her until she didn't know which was stronger. At home, Daniel started noticing. "You've been coming home late a lot," he said one night, standing in the doorway as she set down her purse. "You never used to work this much," Emma forced a smile, her hands gripping the counter behind her. "Mr. Carter has had me handling more responsibilities. It's just temporary." Daniel's eyes lingered on her, searching for something, but he only nodded. "Okay," he said, though the doubt in his voice was unmistakable. She kissed him that night, hoping it would make the guilt fade, hoping it would bring her back to the woman she was before all of this started. But as his lips met hers, all she could think about was how his kiss felt different now, less thrilling, less consuming, less anything. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. The evening had settled into a familiar rhythm, one where Emma and Mr. Carter no longer pretended to fight what was already happening. The office was empty, save for the two of them, their lingering gazes and the heat between them filling the space more than any words ever could. Emma stood near his desk, her fingers lightly gripping the edge as Mr. Carter stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the best and worst way possible. His hands brushed against her waist, his lips hovering just near her ear as he murmured, "You knew this was inevitable." And maybe he was right. Her breath hitched as his fingers traced down her spine, the thrill of his touch sending shivers through her body. This was dangerous, this was wrong, this was unstoppable, but the moment was shattered in an instant. The sound of a door creaking open froze them both. Emma turned, her pulse dropping into her stomach. Daniel stood in the doorway. He held a bag of takeout, his eyes flickering between them, taking in the way Carter was too close, the way Emma's blouse was slightly wrinkled, the way her breath came too fast. For a second no one spoke. The world had stopped. Then Daniel's face twisted with realization, pain flashing across his features like a wound tearing open right in front of her. The takeout bag slipped from his grip, landing on the floor with a dull thud. "What the hell is this?" His voice wasn't raised. It was low, strained, so much worse than if he had yelled. Emma opened her mouth, but what could she say? The guilt she had shoved to the back of her mind came rushing in like a tidal wave, suffocating her. "Daniel, His jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. "Don't!" He cut her off, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Just don't!" Mr. Carter, unshaken, unapologetic, straightened his tie. "Daniel, I think we should all calm down." Daniel turned on him, his entire body coiled with rage. "Shut the hell up," he spat, his voice cracking. His eyes were wild, betrayed, devastated. He turned back to Emma, his voice breaking. "How long?" Emma felt the walls closing in. Her throat was dry. "Daniel, please." "How long, Emma?" he demanded, his voice rising now, pain fueling his anger. The truth sat heavy between them, undeniable. There was no excuse, no way to take it back. She had destroyed everything. Daniel let out a hollow laugh, his head tilting back as if he needed to catch his breath. Then, Shaking his head one last time, he turned and walked away. Emma wanted to chase after him, to beg, to explain, but her feet wouldn't move, because she knew. It was too late. Emma sat in the cold silence of her empty home, the weight of what she had done pressing down on her like an unbearable force. Daniel was gone. After that night, he hadn't come home. No calls, no texts, just the absence of his presence, a void where their life together used to be. She had tried reaching out, leaving messages, but they went unanswered. The worst part was knowing that this wasn't something that could be fixed with an apology. Some betrayals left scars too deep to heal. She stared at the wedding photo on the mantel, her fingers tightening into fists. What had she done? Daniel had always been the steady one, the man who supported her through every struggle, who never once gave her a reason to doubt his loyalty. And yet she had thrown it all away. For what? A thrill? A moment of feeling desired? Mr. Carter hadn't called. Not since that night. And she knew he wouldn't. She was foolish to think she had meant anything more to him than a passing indulgence. Men like him always moved on effortlessly. There would be another woman, another fleeting temptation. But Emma was the one left to pick up the pieces of her broken life. She walked through the house, the place that had once been filled with warmth and laughter now felt foreign, unfamiliar, like it no longer belonged to her. She could still hear Daniel's voice in her mind, the way it had cracked when he had asked, "How long?" The pain in his eyes haunted her. Emma wanted to believe she had been unhappy before the affair, that something had been missing in her marriage, but now she saw the truth. It wasn't Daniel who had changed. It was her. She had searched for excitement in the wrong place, mistaking attention for love, mistaking secrecy for passion, and in the end, all she had left was regret. Sitting at the edge of their bed, her bed now, she let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Some mistakes can never be undone. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Daniel had given her his love, his trust, his life, and she had given it all away for nothing. Tears blurred her vision as she reached for her phone again, staring at his name on the screen. She wanted to say something, anything, but what was there left to say? She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it.